A spiritual journey to Rome. Some comments before I read my diary, which I have comprised. This is based on my travel to Rome from the perspective of a Roman pagan and a practicing occultist and magus of the Hermetical pathway. This naturally means that I will be judgmental from this perspective. I want to add that I know many people on different pathways than mine, even some whose prefaces and ideas are in principle hostile or antagonistic to mine, to which I still have a personally friendly relationship. I hope to keep that in mind, but as a reporter of the occult and an initiate and a Roman priest, I can see this only as I saw it, and just on that perspective this is written. A Spiritual Journey to Rome by Gaius Florius Aetius Sacerdos Apollini, the journey from April 4th to April 10th in the year 2025 of the Common Era. When I decided to travel to Rome at the beginning of 2025, I had two things in mind. I wanted to go to the sunny south, and I wanted to visit historical sites, as I am not a fan of boring beach vacations. What initially revolved around places in Greece soon crystallized into Rome, for nowhere else would I find so many places of historical and personal spiritual significance in one region. So off to Rome. Arriving on Friday the 4th and departing on Thursday, April the 10th, I would have 5 full days at my disposal. I had planned these in advance very carefully and ended up deviating from my plan in only one respect, which was particularly important as I wanted to purchase all tickets online in advance so as not to be left standing at the door on one of the major attractions. In this very private and spiritual report, however, I will only shed light on this perspective. A regular travelogue that goes into more details about what I saw with my pictures and film footage will likely follow later on. This report, however, is aimed to more certain enthusiasts, those interested in spirituality and religions, and students of the occult. As I will focus on these things in particular in this report, it was clear to me from the outset that as a Roman pagan and priest of Apollo, I would be on a journey of a personal pilgrimage, a spiritual quest, and an occult testing time. About myself. Not everyone is familiar with my spiritual and occult background, so to help listeners to understand this report, I would like to tell you a little about myself, the traveler. I embarked on this journey in the 54th year of my life. Since I was in the 15th year of my life, I have considered myself a pagan and polytheist. At the age of 16, I was elected a Germanic priest or Godi by a group here in Berlin, and since then I have always actively practiced pagan priesthood. In the 2000s, my activities were, however, at a low point, but after around 2010 I became interested in the Roman religion, which seemed more suitable for the life of a modern person living in a big city. I know that even many pagans are unfamiliar with the Roman polytheist religion and consider it mostly a copy of the Greek religion. I cannot go into all of this here, but please suffice to say that the Cultus Deorum Romanorum, also known as Mos Maiorum, meaning the Roman polytheist or paganist religion, is a complete separate entity of its own. But at the same time, I also have been an initiate into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn for now 38 years, and I am now in the master degrees, and I have been a Thelemite for just equally as long. The teachings of Thelema are of central importance to me, and they are always the final and highest authority on the question of what is the right path for me when I am uncertain. This is important to know in order to understand the development of my priesthood as well as my trip to Rome. According to Thelema, I am convinced that every human being is an enlightened son, a unique divine and solar being whose path we call the true will, and whose founding god is the solar divine child, the god we call Horus. For me, the ultimate perspective is always, does this path serve to better understand the true will, or does it hinder this understanding? The solar element is also very important. I assume a solar supreme deity who usually takes the form of the solar child. For me, I call this a kind of polytheistic henotheism, which means that I believe in one creator god, the solar child, Horus in the Ceramic terminology, who revealed a personal name to me when I became Magus, the degree, in the Hermetic Order. Outwardly, the solar created child has the title Sol Invictus, but he has many avatar deities, solar gods in many pantheons, most notably Apollon, Horus, Malakbel, and also Mithras. He is the pure one light from which everything emerges, and in the other solar gods he reveals himself to people of different variations, yet always being the same. As a polytheistic henotheist, however, I worship not only one god, but also others, Roman mostly, but also Germanic from my home, and some from other familiar pantheons from all over the world. This development took place within me in the last 2 or 3 years, and my visit to Rome has, in a sense, rounded off this journey to give me a new, clearer perspective on the many gods and Sol Invictus in their differences, as well as the many manifestations of the solar god and his relationship to the many gods. The journey. So I arrived in Rome in the late afternoon of Friday, April 4th, 2025. As I am no longer on the top of hills, the journey there and back and my stay was, to realize later, really a borderline strain for me, and it may have been my last trip. In any case, I cannot manage something like this alone again, but that is the way of the world. I spent the early evening looking around in the area around the Hotel San Marco, a beautiful part of Rome, close to the city center. It was a particularly sublime moment for me to set foot on this 2,800-year-old city for the first time in my life. A city center largely devoid of ugly modernist buildings, where you can hardly walk a block without coming across ancient or otherwise old structures, ruins, buildings, and stone witnesses to this long period of time. The traditional narrow streets are also particularly striking, a reminiscent of the narrow streets of ancient Roman cities, just so unlike the car-friendly and car-focused cities of modern Germany or the United States. Today, as I begin this writing, April 19th, I took the bus into town. The grey Berlin sky and cool 11 degrees Celsius reminded me so much of the contrast. O son of Italy, your lovely lights, sends us hope and confidence, a song the tenor Fritz Wunderlich once sang, and that is how I felt then. There the sun is the almighty ruler of the sky, unsullied by a single cloud. And as today, as I begin to write this, I walk and drive through the streets of Berlin, I miss the lovely bright light of Italy, the beautiful streets of Rome, the only true Caput Mundi, the capital of the world. How much Rome shaped the whole world today would be a topic all in itself. But clearly no single city has ever shaped the world as much as Rome. It shaped Europe, passing on intellectual Hellenic ideas with practical concepts all over Europe and through Europe to the world. Already in Rome, and even more so there, it became clear to me how much my homeland Germania is shaped by the gloom of the weather, and how different Italy is being because of its light. Dark philosophical labyrinths of thinkers in dark chambers outside fog-rain forests, and from this my country grew people like Kant and Wittgenstein, Nietzsche and Hegel, Schopenhauer and so many others who always have a heaviness, some foggy and darkness about their philosophies. Oh, how different is thinking and feeling there in Rome, in Italy. It is more like dancing. One immediately feels that one is breathing freer, higher air, and one has escaped the gloom of the grey north. And now that I am back again, I already miss it, even though the last day in Rome was a bitter ordeal. But I'm getting ahead of myself. How strongly the weather, the landscape, the architecture and climate shape the human spirit became even clearer to me now than it was already before. Sunday, April the 5th. On the first day I wanted to see what was special and grand for me. Shortly before 10 a.m. I arrived so at the Pantheon, whose initial construction was commissioned by Consul Marcus Agrippa in 27 BC, and whose name still adorns the pediment today. Its conversion to its present form was completed around 126 AD, in the time of Emperor Hadrian, and for the next round about 1,700 years it was the largest dome in the world. Statues of Julius Caesar and probably Venus and Mars and other gods stood once there, and it was dedicated to all the gods of Rome in their entirety. It is sad for me to see that it was converted into a church at such an early stage, but it is the only building that has completely retained its original splendor and not been stripped of its columns, marble, or mosaics like all the other buildings. It is not certain whether this temple of all the gods of Rome was actively used as a temple for rituals, or whether it was more a general tribute to them. Today there are many statues of Mary, the tombs of two kings of Italy, a Christian altar, and strangely hidden in a left-hand corner, a crucifix. The latter irritated me somewhat because it seemed almost bashful, as if the crucifix was playing a minor role in this house. If I had landed here as an alien from another planet and never had heard of Christianity, seeing the inside of this building, I would never have thought, given its secondary position, that this crucified man was the central figure of its religion. Even though I could feel the breaths of the gods of Rome, it is important to note here that, as in many places of Rome, this was now incredibly densely crowded with people that drowned out any spirituality, like a loud noise, and I needed a long time of inner pause and reflection to attune myself to the energies. Here I learned much more clearly what I had previously dismissed as something of a personal arrogance. Spirituality is never for the masses. This is where external religion has its value, as a bridge and a mediator. I avoided looking at the crucifix, but I was about to leave. I was drawn to it. Perhaps I wanted to face it, to dare. What would I feel? Anger? Sadness? Vengefulness? But the truth is, when I stood before the crucified Jesus, there in the corner, almost hidden, I felt nothing. This crucified man literally felt and meant nothing to me. But as I turned away, I heard a voice. It was like a deep lament, the pain of someone in distress, and it came from the crucified man. And those were the words echoing in my mind. Free me, save me from this captivity. It was such an overwhelming feeling of clarity that came to me then. This man, Jesus of Galilee, is here a prisoner, captured long ago by a community of black brothers and enslaved for their sinister purposes. With every crucifix, with every church, a part of this man was held in slavery by the powers of the church, like 1,000 splinters of a soul. And how right I was, I would realize later in visiting St. Peter's Basilica. At first, I very reluctantly stepped back. In my lessons as a servant of Apollo in the between worlds, I had learned abilities which are not magic, but similar could be described as such. One of these so-called spells is the Hand of Light. It involves making a specific gesture, and a beam of solar light shoots forward. It is usually used for banishing and cleansing, and I had been warned against overusing it, due to several harsh setbacks in my past trying to become a diamond servant of Apollo. For one thing, it makes you visible to the Black Brothers, as if you were creating a pillar of light several 100 kilometers wide that screams, "Here I am." This has once exposed me to severe attack by the Black Brothers several times, so I was of course very hesitant to use it here. But the need seemed so intense to me, and my will to contribute to the purification of this place made me take the risk. I made the gesture toward the crucifix and released this imprisoned part of the Nazarene's soul from its prison. I felt how grateful this part of the soul, as it was disappearing through the open dome roof, freed from a very long bondage. I do not want to claim this for myself. Others of much more power than I had probably worked before me here many times, so likely my action here at that day was only the last step in a chain of us servants of the solar light and Hermetic initiates to purify this place. But feeling peace, as having done the task I was sent to, I rested within myself and was able to leave the Pantheon with clear mind. In the afternoon I came to the Forum Romanum, and that was a real ordeal on many levels. For one thing, when you walk around within it, it is almost impossible to imagine what the Forum once looked like. Too much in this is in ruins, perhaps the building of the Vestal Virgins and the remain of the temple that housed the eternal fire are something of an imagination to give. There is in the shade of the low trees around it, where I still felt the eternal flame where the rotunda once stood, invisible, but bright and strong as ever. But that was the only place in the Forum where I really felt something, and even here the large crowds of masses of people hindered me. Now the Forum itself is a large area, so my health was pushed to its limits here, because my main goal was the temple of Apollo Palatinus, which Emperor Augustus, who honored Apollo as a great main deity, had built right next to his own estate, thus introducing the worship of the solar principle as one of importance to Rome. I knew how little was left of the temple from photos from the internet, and on the Palatine Hill in the afternoon heat, after hours of searching, I finally found the foundation a little off the tourist trail. Here I rested meditatively, with few tourists, said my prepared prayer, buried the crystal which I had brought with me to the earth of the temple. I felt the presence of Apollo. But already here I sensed the echo of a warning, a lesson. For me, sadness, anger, and bitterness were the prevailing emotion, no matter how bright and sublime Apollo's presence was around me. This desecration outraged me. I was not yet ready for the lesson that was to come, but it ended with what is probably the most beautiful view from the terrace where once the palace of Emperor Domitian once stood, high on the Palatine Hill, because from here you have a magnificent view on the Forum, and only there you understand and recognize the whole much more clearly than when you walk around in the middle of it just far below, between ruins and stones. I realized the grandeur of this sacred place, and much more clearly here from this bird-eyes view, and so my visit to the Forum ended in inner serenity and the reward of having entered and experienced the center of the world. I was too tired to visit the Colosseum afterwards when I left southward via the Via Sacra. I had bypassed it later several times during my trip, but I never felt that I was missing out much by not seeing it from the inside. Its lofty grandeur was more indicative of the pinnacle of architectural achievement. It stood there like a wonder of the world, close to where Nero's Colossus and the Golden House once stood, and later the Colosseum, the Flavian Amphitheatre. When Nero's golden statue had been converted into a Colossus of Sol Invictus, there I sat eating my first Italian ice cream and letting the grandeur sink in. Diagonally opposite stood the large era of once the gigantic double temple of Roma and Venus stood, which also could be seen how enormous it must have been, and one corner where once stood a temple in honor of Emperor Elagabalus. Sunday, April 6. Since I had scheduled my visit to St. Peter's Basilica for 3:30 p.m., I decided to take my time and make a very important visit of personal meaning in the morning. Where the remains of the Marcellus Theatre stand, there are 3 corner columns of the older temple of Apollo, the Apollo Medicus temple. There I lingered for a long time in prayer, and contrary to my usual custom, I picked up a fallen stone whose white structure indicated to me that it was once part of the temple. I began here with my thanks for the decades of guidance and asked that he continued to approve my training and my approach to become a daimon of Apollo. Here, secluded and little visited by other people, I felt a benevolent presence, and a great peace came over me. I briefly honored the remains of the temple of the goddess of war Bellona next to it, and then stood meditating for a long time in front of the remaining entrance to the Porticus Octavia, where once stood the great temples of Juno Regina on the left and Jupiter Stator on the right. I paid my respects to the god and goddess who lead as gods as king, the gods as king and queen, and despite the chaotic construction that followed in centuries later, their power shone upon me unclouded, probably also because only few visitors come to this place and darken it with their auras. After the hustle and bustle and physical exertion of the previous day, I had planned to visit St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City on that Sunday afternoon. Since I didn't know that 2025 was a holy year, as is probably the case every 25 years, as a Catholic explained to me when I asked, there were perhaps more people than usual. I had prepared myself as a mage and an occultist for many occurrences probably may be happening here. This is the center of the enemy Yaldabaoth, the starting point of the destruction of our sanctuaries and religion, and I was loaded to fight and to face high expectations. I had no idea what to expect in terms of architecture, but what surprised me was how banal and disappointing the whole visit ultimately was. The round plaza in front was large, but somehow not very sublime. I could just as well have been a plaza of concerts or performances, and once inside the dome, this impression was just reinforced. This place was not a spiritual center, but one of worldly power. That was clearly the purpose for which it was built. I had seen many beautiful churches and cathedrals, large and small, whose light-filled grandeur impressed me. Rouen and Notre Dame, St. Paul's Cathedral and Westminster Abbey in London, Cologne Cathedral, and small churches in many a village, Gothic style and otherwise, with the large, colourful stained glass windows, the high arches. They made a holy impression on me, even as a non-Christian. But this building, the centre of Catholic Christianity, was architecturally and in terms of art banal. Despite its size, it was like a desperate attempt to outdo pagan Rome in size and pomp by people who lacked style and any sense for the sacred. Inside it was even worse than the Pantheon. Everywhere there were coffins of dead popes, as if one were among necromancers, and gigantic statues of popes stared down domineeringly like Ciceroes from every corner. A completely uneducated person would assume that this was a cult worshipping humans, with the popes as the highest gods. And here too, strangely enough, there was one statue of Jesus in the rear left corner, largely hidden behind a large column. At that moment I could completely understand Martin Luther's thoughts here. Humans were worshipped here, popes and several Marys. The popes often flanked by statues like pagan goddesses, only here reinterpreted as allegories of Christian virtues, like one of them resembling Fortuna was explained as the Christian virtue of generosity. It was a terrible, kitschy mishmash. Nothing here reminded me of Christ, and despite it being a pilgrimage year, I saw almost no one who was moved to pray here. And here too Jesus radiated a feeling of imprisonment. When I came to the famous main altar, surrounded by the 4 black columns, a fitting colour for this place, I probably called out too boldly my challenge to the Kakodaimon Jeve, Yaldabaoth, the great deceiver. But I was met only with silence. Whatever sacred or dark things this place might once have harboured, there was nothing here. Only when I turned away did I briefly hear the mocking words of Yaldabaoth in my mind. There is nothing here for you or me any more, Ashtanel. You have only wasted your time coming. Then he laughed, and it was as if he meant that his focus had long since shifted away from this church as an instrument. Lingering in the lobby, meditating about this sentence, I came to meet a middle-aged priest in a black robe passing me, probably an Italian, showing a family around. I mention this only because he seemed to be the only one who really took notice of me. And God be my witness, rarely have I seen such cold, malicious blue eyes. A smile that never reached the eyes, staring at me a little longer than polite, and I knew for the first time in my life that I was truly standing face to face with one of the Black Brothers themselves. I recklessly dismissed it at the time. I allowed myself to be deceived in this place. There is nothing here any more, the Dark Guardian had said. I hadn't sensed anything, but I was deceived, as I much later would come to realize, and it was hubris on my part to think that the Black Brothers and their master could not escape my gaze. Here the dark eye fell upon me, and only the protection of the gods delayed his curse until the last day. I faced the house of the enemy, and overestimated my ability to see, to recognize him when he was around me. I stood, if I may allow this comparison, there like Mace Windu in the peaceful office of Chancellor Palpatine, and I did not see who was in front of me. That was the defeat I took away from there, the certainty of my fallibility, even there in the heart of the enemy being blinded. And this was my first lesson. Darkness can hide right in front of us, no matter how strong our occult vision has become. Making itself invisible is its mastery, and this should never be underestimated. But otherwise, I had used this Sunday to simply wander through the downtown of Rome, and in the late afternoon I enjoyed the Italian sun, the dolce vita by eating a little bit, and the cheerful, relaxed Italian way of life. Monday, April the 7th. This day was a special anniversary for me personally, because in that day in 1990, as a Selamite, I had held my first public reading of the Liber al Velegis with 2 members of the Order, thus beginning my public work as a Selamite. So I had 2 personally very special treasures before me on this day, the Capitoline Museum and the Ara Pacis of Emperor Augustus. I set off to the Capitoline Hill in the early hours of the morning. Once upon a time, facing down towards the Forum Romanum, there stood the great temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter the best and the highest, indicating that he is not only the most powerful god, but also the highest in all that is good, and such is the view of the Romans of this exalted god. Today, however, there is a square on the side, designed in the Renaissance by no one other than Michelangelo Buonarroti. Unfortunately, to my bad luck, I was unable to see any of it, because the construction work in the Holy Year had concealed the entirety of the splendorous building behind scaffolding. Only the sublime equestrian statue of Emperor Antinous Pius stood free and welcomed me there. Decades ago, I had the same bad luck when I visited London, and Buckingham Palace was completely covered. The Capitol, a hill whose name epitomizes rules to the world as capital, as the capital city, the epitome of power, is still the spiritual heart of Rome. The steps leading up to it are steep, and even today I could feel the pulsating, sublime power of the heavenly king, which I believe the present square does still do justice. The Capitoline Museum is something of an insider tip. It is also a large collection of antiquities, but not too many people find they were there, which was a blessing for me. The collection of ancient statues and busts was incredibly extensive, and early on I was greeted by a familiar altar bearing the sacred face of Sol Invictus, and I knelt in prayer to honor my own supreme god. Opposite of it was an altar of the brothers Malakbel and Agribol, the highest gods of one of the holy cities of Sol Invictus, Palmyra. Here is Malakbel, the god of the sun, the eastern name of Sol Invictus, shaking hands with his brother Agribol, the god of the moon. Thus, in this square room, between the 2 altars on either side of me, my spiritual deeper journey began for him, the solar lord, that I have been seeking and developed a high cult for years, of which Sol Invictus, Malakbel, Apollo, Mithras, Horus, and the solar child Elorion are different forms, names, and manifestations of the one from all things came forth. Surrounded by these 2 altars, I vowed to continue this journey of the soul, of recreation of this idea, and I felt very blessed to see their ancient presence directly in front of me, and touched both briefly in a request for their guidance. The museum contains many things: coffins and tombstones, tablets of law and memorial plaque, the well-known ancient Roman calendar, the traditional Roman representation of Mars, Mercury. A special sign for me was also the ancient black statue of the falcon god Horus, with whom I paid homage as a Thelemite with the recitation of the two famous sentences of Thelema. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love and the will. There was also the great god Pan, and I saw for the first time that Pan had a third eye in the middle of his forehead, which I had never noticed before. I passed Diana Artemis with a greeting and paused there to contemplate on the first statue of Apollo with his Kitara. There are countless halls here, and you can enjoy a great deal of peace and quiet. There are busts of innumerable great Romans and Greeks in endless halls and rooms, but it is best to choose what is personally important to you and linger there rather than allowing yourself to be distracted by the excess of variety. I greeted some whom I am honored, the great speaker Cicero, the founder of the West Socrates, as well as the daring Elagabalus, and I was delighted to see especially an octagonal room reserved for Venus alone, with a mirror behind her, showing her equally beautiful back to the viewer in front. There also was a beautiful portrait of the deified lover of Emperor Hadrian Antinos, and with my fingers I gave the patron saint of my people an indirect kiss on his marble lips, asking him to protect us minority people in these dark times. After a break at noon, the afternoon was devoted to the sacred shrine of the Ara Pacis, or Ara Pacis, as it would be in ancient times. This one has a very special significance of a personal and general nature. Augustus had this rectangular shrine built in 13 BC on the Campus Martius, at the time a large, mostly undeveloped area, and the timekeeping obelisk was positioned so that on September 23rd, the emperor's birthday and the autumn equinox, its shadow fell directly on the altar of peace at sunset. But unfortunately the shrine had sunken into the marshy ground, parts of it were scattered all around the world, and it had only been reassembled from fragment at the beginning of the 20th century. This museum, which ensures its preservation through temperature and air control, is, however, of exquisite ugliness, and known and much debated about for that. However, I was there for something very personal, so it didn't bother me much. A few years ago, I had received my first vision of the solar child god, the name given to me Elorian, promising me a new golden age would begin when the Ara Pacis was reconsecrated, and it would become the center of a new spiritual era. With the shrine, Augustus established his idea of Roman peace, a civilization that would unite the world and keep it in peace and justice. And there, deep inside the shrine, I felt its presence. It was like a brooding egg of white light, a promise of redemption for the future. I was so overwhelmed by this certainty that all my burdens fell away at that moment. With my hand I touched the shrine and spoke my only request that I had to the sleeping divine there. And thus I said, "Soon I will be gone, home to my world, back far away from this human world, back to Edan. Please promise me, sleeping god-child, that you will watch over humans when all we starborns are gone." And I received his assurance. I was concerned about the building, for it had already been destroyed once and scattered, and it seemed to me a profound sign that it was precisely at the beginning of the 20th century that the shrine was first rebuilt for the first time, the century in which the new age of Horus, the solar god, began, the aeon of Thelema, and the destruction of the old age began so violently to unfold. But I also began to understand one thing. Sacred buildings, temples, great statues dedicated to the gods, they never perish. but in the time to come, they will no longer be the focus, maybe, and as they were in the past eon. And I would learn this later from none other than Apollo himself, but more on that later. I wandered around outside the Forum Romanum again, this time from above, and got some better pictures and views on the imperial forums, especially the still impressive remains of the Temple of Mars Ultor and Trajan's Forum with its semicircle of market stalls, flanked by the famous column of Trajan, which honors his great victory over the Dacians. But unfortunately, you can also see why the Ara Pacis is sensibly located in a separate room, as the frescoes on the column here, which stands here free in the city on its own, are sadly very weathered. Of course, the church could not resist melting down the crowning portrait of Emperor Hadrian and attaching a St. Peter instead to it. Just like a dog pees on the corners, they probably have this inner compulsion to mark everything that does not belong to them, which is just one of the many testimonies of their awareness of their complete inferiority. Tuesday, April the 8th. This particularly holy day, on which the first chapter of the Book of the Law of the New Aeon was dictated in 1904, was also the penultimate day of my trip. I had planned to visit the Vatican Museum, which opened early at 8:30 a.m. It is considered the greatest attraction in Rome and the most important museum of ancient art, doubtlessly, culminating in a visit of the Sistine Chapel. There was far too much to see in that museum to really report on. First there came older collections from Sumer, Babylon and Egypt. There was a small collection of tablets and stamps from the Sumerians and Babylonians from roughly 1000 back all to 2500 BC, sales contracts, letters of complaints, invoices. I was very moved by the insight how people lived just 4500 years ago, just like us, and it was precisely these everyday written records in stone which touched me. I turned very intently to two Babylonian reliefs depicting diamonds or genius, as I aspired to rise to their rank, albeit as the least of them all, in the now aging body in the service of Apollo, and I felt their greeting, which I returned. These oldest images of the personal servants of deities touched me deeply, because of my own quest to serve my God as a diamond in his service, and the friendly atmosphere gave me hope. Here was a sheer mass or worm of people crawling on, and the utter excess of the collection gave me an impression as if watching a pirate's treasure being displayed to show off. I had imagined a more spacious museum, but here a band of papist robbers had simply piled up everything and grouped it very roughly, which deeply contradicted the ancient meaning of the individual displays. Nevertheless, I managed to step out of the constantly shifting crowd to the shrines and statues that were important to me, shield my Ara in a quick meditation, and achieve a more intimate contact with a few of the exhibits. I honored a gallery where Hadrian and his beloved Antinous looked into each other's eyes. I greeted a beautiful Hermes and a charming Ganymede and some busts of Father Janus, which were very fascinating to see in 3D and real life, and not just as flat photographs. And there I also saw here for the first time a complete relief of Mithras killing the bull. The torchbearers at his side, the gaze turned away from the bull upward to the sky, where the radiant image of Sol Invictus indicated their intimate connection. What struck me again in the following days as I tried to understand the meaning of the cult of Mithras was this. The torchbearers, like many other details, in every depiction seemed to vary. Here on this one, both torches pointed downwards, whereas often one points upwards, one downwards, which has been interpreted in very specific ways. But the discrepancies came back to me afterwards, and I will return to them later. The number of gods and heroes, ordinary people, and everyday life here is almost infinite. I found the statue of Hecate particularly interesting. Being able to see the three bodies of one being from all sides was of course special. It was interesting that the front one had a kind of spiked halo and a Phrygian cap, which I had not seen before in any depictions of Hecate. This is also a point I have already made in writings in paganism, namely that in paganism there is not one true interpretation, and that arguments about who knows the true interpretation of something is completely anti and unpagan, a relic of Christian thinking which completely misguides us to this very day. The diverse representations of the gods I saw demonstrated this most clearly to me. Then I came to a large marble statue of Mithras in the familiar pose of the bull slayer. It was extremely impressive, and for the first time I felt a true connection, but at that moment I dismissed it as being moved just by the art. I was lost in prayer for a long time in front of a special statue of Apollo, and kissed his marble feet in farewell, and there I heard a teaching that became very important to me in the following period, as I thought about it, and also as I sorted out my experiences in Rome. And it was something like this. We gods have never been truly inside of statues the way you think. We have never been needed temple, for we the gods are everywhere. But simple people need temples and large images, and do not look down on them for that. But you, O initiate, do not be sad, for although we bless all those who seek our ancient images and the remains of our temples, this is not what we are. For a sanctuary is always where you seek one, and the honor is where you honor it. Therefore, do not mourn the losses, for I indeed will be near you, my seeker, everywhere you go. Even as if there is no temple of stone, there will be eternal temples, and every seeker will find them. For man's work passes away, but our temples are the work of us who are eternal, and they are eternally discoverable by all who seek us. I must admit that these words shook me deeply, for even though I intellectually know this fundamentally as an initiate of the Hermetic path, I only grasped it fully here as I stood in this place where the ancient sanctuaries and statues had been set up like plunder, all for the efforts of Yaldabaoth, the nameless fallen Cacodemon and his vanity. For nothing diminishes the presence of the god, and they may be buried and erect thousands of their unholy images and masks of shame, there will not be standing an inch taller. The end of this path, so to speak, was the large portrait of Apollo Belvedere. Although, as in the pictures, I must admit, I found the statue not so much appealing, and Apollo's presence in the more archaic stances spoke much more to me. Perhaps this statue of Apollo Belvedere, it was too intentional here, too much the artist who wanted to show off Apollo instead of honoring the god. This is a copy of a Greek bronze from around 350 BC, and therefore very old. Many travelers, including Goethe himself, honored the statue as the pinnacle of ancient art. I, however, tended to agree with the opinion that emerged in the late 19th century, when more archaic statues of the god were found, that this one is too mannered and somehow androgynous. This image does not look at all like Apollo for a temple, benevolently turning towards the worshipper, but rather like an ornament, even of the most great art, but it honored more the art, the high god, than a desire for connection to and with him. For me, the crowning glory of this exhibition, however, was the large rotunda that enclosed the ancient area with the red bars of Emperor Nero, carved from a single block of porphyry, a dome roof similar to the Pantheon with flowers, of which I learned that no two are identical, which struck me as a very particularly sublime and sacred idea, both as a Thelemite and as a pagan. And of course the huge statues which make me feel for the first time that I was in a true temple. The golden bronze statue of Hercules, the monumental of Antinous, to whom I gazed for a long time, a portrait of the gold goddess Ceres, and, very appealing to me, Juno Sospita, Juno as warrior and protector, who would later appear to me again in a dream when I was in Berlin. I must admit that before I had little connection to Juno the goddess, but this large statue conveyed a whole new and understandable side to the goddess to me, which the dream later also would confirm, so that my connection to the gods was expanded and deepened overall through my visit to Rome. Then came the tedious and endlessly boring hall with Christian tapestry of distinctly inferior artistic quality that meant nothing to me, then an equally long and boring hall of maps of the provinces of Italy, and, finally, the Sistine Chapel. I must add that I had already been in the museum at the time for 4.5 hours, even though I was by no means lingering, and the chapel was packed to the brim with people. Both factors may have clouded my judgment, but I was deeply disappointed. I am certainly familiar with cathedrals that I find to be sublime, spiritual places, those of the Gothic and related styles which are named before, Notre Dame, Westminster, Cologne, and other places, or small churches in villages. But this was a windowless room, not even particularly large, like a box in a basement, covered from top to bottom with extremely colorful pictures in every thinkable area, so that the eye could find no rest. It seemed as if someone had dropped a gigantic, brightly colored comic book on the walls and ceilings. This so highly revered building, I felt nothing sacred here, nor did I find any art that appealed to me in any way, much in contrast to Gothic cathedrals, for example. This, to me, was just extremely colorful kitsch, an overloaded hall without windows. There were simply too many pictures. And where there's too much of something, there is nothing special. And when I thought about that later, it was also likely my impression of Rome itself, a strange insight and paradox. Of course, for example, in Berlin, we have comparatively puny only one gate, the Brandenburg Gate. Rome has hundreds, maybe 1,000 of such gates, each more magnificent and noble than ours. One is amazed, moved by the sheer density that diminishes the perceived value in the long run. Ancient temples had one deity. They were rare and scattered beyond the Forum. In the center of Rome, the museums, and here in the Sistine Chapel, the principle was the more of something the better. And this is simply not true. For the first time at that moment I began to feel a little bit homesick. I wanted to return from the white hustle and bustle of Rome, the dense crowds of modern Rome, where nothing works truly orderly as I know it from Germany. Long waits for buses and subways, which were always packed and crowded, and I was so overwhelmed by the restlessness and the density of art, history, and people alike. I had seen Gondor, Minas Tirith, and I began to miss the Shire. I was now at that point physically and mentally so exhausted that I decided to cancel the afternoon tour I had ordered to Castel del Salangelo, formerly Hadrian's mausoleum. Too much castle, running around, and only one room with a stone coffin and the statue of Hadrian. Ah, no. It was too much for me, too much to walk, my legs, my feet hurting. Then I remembered a tip from a friend who, like me, is a Roman cultor, and an occultist, who advised me to visit a famous Mithraeum, a sanctuary of Mithras, deep beneath the Basilica del San Clemente. A tip for which I will be forever grateful. I booked a late tour at 5 p.m., which was lucky, as I had the entire Mithraeum practically for myself at the time. The visit was, and this only became clear in retrospect during meditation here at home, the true turning point and also the spiritual conclusion of my journey. That and what followed from it. I went to the first basement. There was a not so uninteresting old 5th century church, and from there, dark in the depths at the second layer of the cellar, the Mithraeum. Coolness and twilight surrounded me. I heard the murmuring spring in the distance, and I was immediately struck and overcome by the sanctity and purity of this place. As I have said before, Mithras had not played a role in my life until then, but fate had led me here. Finally, standing in the front of the sanctuary, the altar of Mithras in the middle, the statue at the head, the benches on which once the initiated took the holy meal to the left and right, I stood, I knelt, I meditated and sat there for a long time, and the power of the great Mithras welcomed me. The barred-away interior of the sanctuary revealed countless coins on the floor. I threw in one too, a testimony how great the people still today honor Mithras. Only then did I realize this is a God from whom I must learn, to whom I must turn to learn, and what I am still missing. And I also felt a very warm welcome. I can hardly put words into the personal significance of this, and it was also clear to me that this initiation cult of Mithras had the same roots as the Hermetic Order, to which I myself belong, one branch from the same tree of sacred hidden knowledge. And here, at this point, began the initiation orders of the West, which modern orders continue today. And here was another different aspect of Sol Invictus, one that was new to me, one that I had wanted to know from there and learn from. How I would have loved to stay here longer, in the dark, peaceful corridors, in the teaching room, and in this place where all Western mystery schools and occult orders of the West began. I was completely immersed and in other spheres, but one final lesson still lay ahead of me. That is a medical saying, visita interior terrae rectificando invenies occultum lapidem. Visit the interior of the earth, through transformation will you find the occult stone. This is the ancient formula called vitriol, transformation. And just as Mithras was born from the stone as the form of a sun god, so he points out that even in the deepest captivity of matter, the light is present and can liberate itself. I later thought about the depictions and their differences, read about the very different interpretations, which one was probably true. The variations in the depictions, sometimes the torches of the companion point up and down, sometimes only down, and much more differences, as well as my knowledge of cults and orders today, led me to conclude that there probably never was one doctrine that was completely identical in every detail to all regional cults of Mithras. Just as every Golden Dawn order or every Wiccan coven has its own characteristics today, I assumed it must have been no different in the cult of Mithras, and the questions of which interpretations is the only one true at that point seemed completely nonsensical to me. A mystery speaks to us, but we also claim it as our own. According to the ancient teachings I found in the Vatican Museum, Mithras drank the blood of the bull or consumed it, and the bull to gain his life form. I would say to save it, because I simply cannot help to see the scorpion, the snake, and the dog as enemies of the bull, and not as helpers or companions of Mithras. It seems to me rather like the bull is doomed to death, and Mithras saves and preserves his divine power by sacrificing the bull and taking over his energy, thereby also purifying the crude wildness of a sacred bull, a dying eon of the past, whose power the solar warrior Mithras saves within him, preserving it for the future, the coming present eon of the solar child god. The scorpion seems to be associated with the tarot card Death, poisoning the testicles of the bull, and thus the scorpion here is the symbol of hostility against life itself. But just as death is in the middle of the tarot cards, this is only death before rebirth, as is represented by Mithras' birth from stone as the savior god. Also the snake writhes in the dark ground as if waiting for its chance to participate in something to which it has no merit or right, while the dog, in coward sycophancy, pretends to want to help Mithras in order to parasitize on the spoils just as undeservedly. But untouched Mithras looks away, up to the sky and up to Sol Invictus from where he descended, whose divine avatar he himself is. Thus the three animals are allegories of evil. The scorpion of hatred, which denies life itself, the snake of lies and deceit, which creeps up undeservedly to steal something, the dog of cowardice, which only dares to attack when the bull has already been defeated and bound. Hatred, falsehood, and cowardice, the three great evils. But Mithras does not care. Through sacrifice, ritual, death, and trial, he hints at salvation, his face turned away from the entire spectacle. This is a first interpretation as now, almost 2 weeks later, and it seems to me personally to be true and on the right track, mainly because of the events of the following day, which was a lesson which I had to learn. Wednesday, April the 9th. This is the second holy day of the dedication of the Liberal, and for this last full day I had planned a guided tour to the Circus Maximus and the baths of Caracalla. We had a slightly older but very charming guide, Francesca, who was as lively as the country itself. Since the baths are large and relatively well preserved but still in ruins, I wanted to take a guided tour to have things explained to me, and it was therefore a truly crowning finale to learn so many details about the baths of Caracalla especially. This complex is still surrounded by a beautiful park with typical southern trees. After the tour ended, I rested there in their shade when, as everyone from the group was walking away, the realization of something unimaginable hit me. I had been robbed. My identity card, both Visa cards, my debit card, and my health insurance cards, all were gone. The thieves' haul was meager, €23, and I immediately had the cards blocked, so I had no more gain. But now here I was, in the hotel without any idea, and only a little cash left. I must admit this truly. A fall into the darkness. On that day I cursed the false, deceitful city of Roma, and I never wanted to set foot on the treacherous soil of Italy again. But this crisis hit me deep. Why had my gods abandoned me on my pilgrimage? I began to doubt everything, and in those days I even doubted myself and fell into the deepest depths of the earth, where it is only dead matter and every spiritual seems to be gone. The depths of my disappointment and also the doubts about myself were great. Had I been nothing, following nothing but delusions, a deceit of my brain my entire life? Everything was at stake in those days. I did not want another test as a cheap explanation. To hell with tests from the gods, to hell with the gods and everything spiritual. I just wanted to get away from this deceptive land on the cursed day I had decided to come here. I will spare you details of involving the police and the embassy. At that day, I just wanted to go home. Thursday, April the 10th. This last day of the revelation of the Baal seemed only gloomy to me, as I realized today it fitted the dark character of the last part of the book, which is dedicated to the warrior god Ra-Hoor-Kut, the warrior form of Horus. I felt numb inside. I checked out at the hotel at noon and had a difficult 6.5 hours to wait at the airport. I distracted myself as best that I could, and my thought went no longer on Rome. But there at the airport, an inner calm returned, maybe a fatigue, and I finally took off of Rome and other thoughts came to my mind. And I had this maybe strange thought. Wasn't Qui-Gon Jinn a perfect master of light? Weren't Yoda, Mace Windu, and Obi-Wan Kenobi? And yet they all failed against the darkness. How could that have been? How can a servant of the light be anything other than invincible? And as I looked down on Rome from the airplane, I realized how stupid I had been. This wasn't a test sent by the gods. I realized the truth. Life on earth itself is the never-ending test. Once again I thought of Mithras and those vicious animals below. Did not the gods themselves have to fight against forces of evil time and again? It was the age-old question. If the gods are good, why do they allow evil to exist? And I knew the answer long ago. Because in the world of humans, there must be a choice between good and evil. For only then does virtue prove the value of a person. If the gods came down and removed all evil, we would be trapped in a dictatorship of good. And without the freedom to choose evil, our decisions for good would have no value. And I also realized that it is easy when you sit safely in your apartment most of the time, meditating and reaching high spheres, to say that the highest good is pure goodness, and evil is only a deviation, rarely a forgetting of the light, and still believe that it is in the finality so. But that is why Horus exists as a warrior and Mithras as a soldier in this world. Because the price of freedom here is eternal vigilance. Being a servant of the divine is not a free pass against harm. It was a gift that this harm only happened to me after I had experienced everything, so that my journey was not ruined under this shadow from the outset. But I had to understand that evil is real. Evil is powerful. It is on this earth and it never rests. Hence the combative aspect of Mithras. It became clearer to me how my path had been leading to me to a kind of polytheistic henotheism for over 2 years. Sol Invictus, the pure creator, the true origin of all good, all light, which created everything, and whose god avatars the solar deities reveal the different aspect of lights, the paths of all the wayfarers and servants of light. But just as the followers of Sol Invictus and Mithras also honor other gods, so do I, even though I know the one in a henotheistic way, Sol Invictus, the solar god-child who created everything the source of pure good. I will nevertheless always remain a priest of the many other gods. But I realize this. In this world, I am and must be a dualist. I believe in true evil. I believe that it will be defeated in a final battle, or perhaps that there are pure worlds beyond its reach, untouched by the dark. But here on earth, there are the Black Brothers, one of whom I saw at St. Peter's Basilica and who recognized who and what I am. Here is Yaldabaoth, the fallen Cacodemon, who was robbed of his name, and here everywhere are dark souls, people who fall and have fallen, and it can happen anywhere. There is no real safety in this world, no matter how spiritually insightful and occultly powerful or chosen one may be. I know it will take months for me to process these insights truly, but today clarity and peace have returned to my heart. And yet it is a different peace from before, a peace after a battle, knowing that there will always be new challenges in this world, and that there are some powers who are greater than me. A new path of learning lies ahead of me, that which Mithras can teach me. And so the last holy day of Thelebar also concluded the entire teaching and opening of the next necessary path. Epilogue. Today on Easter Sunday, April the 20th, I finish this writing. I think back to yesterday, to that Saturday when I had to drive to the old town here, the gloomy grey skies of Germany, where raindrops fell, the dull greyness that surrounded me instead of the cheerful Italian sun. And there, crossing the street to the pharmacy, I smiled wistfully. Filled with memory, for a few moments I wished for the Italian sun back, to escape grey Germany, its grey people, and all the gloomy, foggy philosophies with their ridiculous seriousness, their busy insect-like behavior, this lack of culture. Yes, I know that there is no perfect place, another true place here on this world for me. And I would quickly tire of the merciless summer heat, for I too have the Germanic heart and find rest in the dark winter days in ways that are foreign to the vastness of Italy and its south. Here where the runes whisper in winter and our gods paint golden colors in the autumn. But in the end, I know and feel this bitterly and liberatingly at the same time. Having traveled to Rome and to many places in my life, this world has no home to me. No city, no country on this earth will ever be truly my home. But one more life and then home to Edan, where my heart and soul always belonged. One last time, and then I must return home and leave humanity to others. That is what we starborns do. Leave. And this time I will be able to let go. Dedication. I came to many places so lovely to behold, when sun around me shimmered and wind in whispers told. I saw life go drifting, saw ages pass me by, and every new beginning still lit my heart with sigh. But never did I find it, the place that felt like home. Though cities shone with splendor, wherever I choose to roam, I felt in all their beauty I was a passing guest, not meant to stay forever, not granted lasting rest. To find the straight true pathway that leads me swiftly on is what my heart has longed, for though this journey's gone and gone, O Edan, dearest homeland,
though earth holds many a shore, not match thy quiet promise. Thy soul I still adore. Soon I must raise and wander to sunlight yet unknown, where those I love are waiting to welcome me back home.